Welcome back. So far in this section, we have learned how to add our JSON Web Token. We understand about authorization, and also we understand about token refresh and access token. So after making all those changes in our application, now it's finally time to test the endpoints using our Postman. So in this section, we will test all the endpoints which we have restricted and also where we have register and login endpoint. So we'll be consuming that from our Postman. So let's get started. To start with, let's open our terminal. And we have made it so many changes. So let's make sure we create a new image and let's start a new container. So we can say docker build -t, basically Flask e-commerce and the current directory. So let me enter. So I'm sure you should be very much familiar with all this. And also we'll say docker run -d -p, this port mapping, our work directory, and so on, right? So let's start the container. Cool, right? So with this, we have started our container. So let's open Postman and let's start testing. So since we have restricted our endpoints by using JWT required, so let's send. We're not able to hit our endpoint, right? So for that, let's open our Docker. Let's go to our containers. And it seems that the application is crashed. So it says that while importing app, an import error was raised, and we see that module not found error, no module name passlib. Okay, this means that we need to add a passlib module, which we add for creating the password. Okay, so let's go back to our application and let's go to our requirement.txt, and here let's add our passlib, right? After we add this dependency, so it's time to create a new image again. Okay, so before we start the container, let's make sure we stop this container. Let's remove and let's go back and let's start our container. Okay, so let's go back to our Postman and now let's say get shops. Nice. So we're getting 401 unauthorized, which means that authorization required request does not contain an access token. Okay, so that means that I need to first register, right? So let's create a new endpoint. Let's say add request, and this should be basically register, right? And this should be a post method. And we need a body. Let's go to raw. Let's go to JSON. And what do we need for this register? So let's go back to our application. Let's go to our user and let me close this and let's go to our /register. So it's here. So this expects an argument of user schema, which is basically ID, username, and password. But mind that ID is a dump only, so we don't require it. So it should be a username and a password, right? So let's send a username and a password. So let's say username. So this would be basically, so let's say learn with Pratap, correct? And the password will be basically, let's say change me. Cool, right? So let's register. Okay, so now user is created successfully. Amazing, right? So let's duplicate this and let's create another request. Duplicate and let's rename this. So this should be basically login. And let's rename this again. This should be basically register. Okay. So let's go to a login and now the endpoint should be login, right? So we have our username and we have our password. So what will happen if I don't provide a correct password? So let me say, just say change only. So let me send, let's say that invalid credential. Cool, right? And let me provide the correct password and let me use a wrong username. So let me say learn with L. Then it still says that invalid credential, right? Cool. So let's say learn with Pratap and the password is change me and let's send. Okay, so now we have our access token and we have our refresh token. Amazing, right? So now let's utilize this access token. So let me copy this token. Okay, and let me try to get shops. So now in order to access this endpoint, I need to provide a access token. So how can I do that? So if you want to provide an access token in the URL, so you should basically, what you can do, so please go to this header section and here go to this section and type authorization. Okay, so we have this third option, authorization. So now for this authorization, the field should be basically a word from bearer and then the token. So simply paste the token and make sure you tick this header. So basically I'm saying that I need to pass a header called authorization. The name should be authorization and the value should be bearer followed by the token which we get in our access token in our login endpoint. So let's send. So here we get an error. So let's go back to our container. Let's see what's wrong. So that means we are getting an error in our app.py line number 31. So it says that key error JTI. what mistake did we did? So let's go to our app.py and let's go to line number 31. Okay. So here, what mistake we are doing is, like, we should not get JTI from our header. If you remember, identity is placed in the payload and not in our header, right? So we should replace this by a payload. So we get our JTI from the payload and not from the header. So let's save this and let's go back to our container, and okay, so it is running, right? So let's go back to our postman and let's send again. Amazing, amazing. So now we have our JWT token working, right? So we're able to authorize. So let me try to change this token key. So instead of SI or SL, I will add one more key here. Let me add K. Let me save. Let me send. And it says invalid token signature verification failed. Cool, right? Okay. Now, in all the endpoints, if I want to hit these endpoints, you see, we need to provide the access token now. So how can we add the access token easily? So let's go to our get shop. Okay, so here, let me help you understand about our environment variables. So let's go to environment. And if you don't have any environment here, you can simply add an environment from here, right? You can name the environment and we can proceed further. For now, I have already created an environment. Okay, so let's go to this REST API Flask. So let's add a couple of variables here. Why? Because I want to store this access token and refresh token in the variable. So this is not how we will do in the browser, but in order to have the same type of functionality in our Postman, let's store this in our browser. Okay, so let's go to our REST API Flask and let's add a new variable. And let's don't have any value now. And let's go to our login again and let's use this refresh token. And let's add the refresh token here. And let's save. This is it, what we have to do here. So what have we done is we have created a variable, environment variable. Okay. And let's close this and let's go to our login endpoint. Okay. So now, before you proceed, please make sure that you have chosen the environment REST API Flask in my case. So please choose that environment and go to this test section. Okay. So in this text section, we will add a couple of lines which will basically extract these access tokens and the refresh token and set to our environment. Let me just copy and paste for simplicity. Okay, so I hope it is visible to you. So we have this JSON data. Basically, we are getting this by json.parse. So this is a JavaScript and Postman supports JavaScript. We parse the response body. And from there, we are setting the environment variable, which we just created access token. We are setting that by JSON data.access token. So we are setting this access token to our environment variable. So let me duplicate this and let me add this for our refresh token. So refresh token and JSON data.refresh token. Okay. So let me reduce size again. Okay, so let me show you one thing. So you can see here, we don't have any value, right? Neither initial value, neither current value. So let's go to our login and we have the correct username with the correct password. So let's send. Okay, so we get a new access token and we get a new refresh token, right? So now if I go to my REST API Flask environment, now you see, we have successfully added our access token and our refresh token. Cool, right? So now let's go to our endpoint. Let's go to our collection. So now instead of hard coding this part, okay, so let me just remove everything. So instead of hard coding that access token, now what I can say is I can say bearer, and now I can use the environment variable. So basically this is a access token, right? So now if I send, I should still get critic grocery. So the next thing what I can do now is I can copy this header and I can, so I need to do one thing. I need to copy all this header and go and add in our header of all the other endpoints. So I can say authorization and the value would be basically bearer. So if I send this, so a shop with the name already exists. So let's add a new shop. We'll say Baskin Robin and let's send. So we're able to add a shop. Okay. So this way you can go and add all these tokens in our each of the endpoints. Cool, right? So let's add another endpoint. Basically this should be logout. Let me add a request. Add request. Let's name it logout. And since our logout endpoint is basically a delete endpoint, so we'll say logout. Okay. And if you remember, to log out, we need access token, right? So let's go and add our favorite thing, bearer access token, and this should be authorization. Okay. So let's send. So we are successfully logged out. Okay. So let's go to our application and let's check our logout endpoint. So when we log out, we basically add that particular token into our blacklist, right? So that means if I try to access any thing with the previous token, I should get token is revoked exception, right? Let's send. Okay, so we see the token has been revoked. Cool, right? Also, we have another endpoint, which is basically token refresh. Let me add a request and let me say it should be refresh. And this should be post. And let me send. So it says request doesn't contain an access token. That means I need to provide the access token. Let's have this access token. And let's say authorization. Okay. So let me send. So this token was revoked, right? If you go and see your environment, I have this refresh token, right? So let me use this to refresh my token. So if you go back to our endpoint, let's go to our refresh. So we say that we should use a fresh token. That means this is JWT required and we need a fresh token in order to create a refresh token, right? So let's try to log in again. Let's go to our login endpoint. Let's send. So we have a new access token now and let's refresh. Let me rename this. Okay, so now we have a new token from our refresh token. Cool, right? So in this section, we have tested our endpoints using Postman. And also we have tested our login endpoint, register endpoint, our refresh endpoint, and also our logout endpoint. So with this, we can conclude that we have handled all our endpoints using a Postman. So in the next section, we will try to consume this endpoint by building a simple front end where we can have the real case scenario of this Postman. So see you there.